You ever stop and wonder how many of the facts you know are complete garbage? We grow up believing all this stuff about ancient civilizations, great inventors, heroic explorers, and legendary kings. But the truth? History is basically a long game of telephone, played by thousands of people with terrible hearing and amazing imaginations. Over the centuries, stories got exaggerated, propaganda got polished, and flat-out lies somehow became common knowledge. And we just swallowed it all. So today, we're cracking open the history books and calling out 40 of the biggest, boldest, and most persistent lies humanity ever believed. From pyramids built by slaves to the unsinkable Titanic to a pastry France literally stole. Every single one of these myths fooled millions of people, and some are still fooling us right now. Get ready to unlearn a lifetime of fake history. This is 40 biggest lies in history everyone just believed. Let's start breaking the spell. Number 1. Pirates buried their treasure. Ahoy matey, grab a shovel. There's gold buried under an X, right? Wrong again. The buried treasure trope comes mostly from one pirate, Captain Kidd, who buried some loot hoping to use it as leverage when caught. Everyone else? They spent their gold immediately. Pirates didn't have savings accounts. They lived hard, partied harder, and usually died young. Why hide your fortune when you could blow it on rum, gambling, and sure leave chaos? The image of treasure maps and secret islands came from Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. It's an awesome story, but 100% fantasy. Real pirates didn't bury gold. They buried their livers. Number 2. Spartans threw weak babies off cliffs. The legend goes that Spartan parents inspected newborns like produce at a market. If the baby looked weak, off the cliff it went. Brutal, cinematic, and completely overblown. That story comes mostly from later writers like Plutarch, who lived centuries after Sparta's glory days and loved a good bit of drama. Archaeologists have found zero evidence of baby bones at the so-called Cliff of Doom. In reality, unhealthy infants were probably abandoned or left to die naturally. Grim, yes, but not ritual cliff-tossing. Sparta was harsh, but not cartoonishly evil. The baby cliff myth stuck because it made Sparta sound like the ultimate warrior factory, part horror story, part propaganda. Number 3. The pyramids were built by slaves. Thanks to every Hollywood movie ever, we picture armies of miserable slaves dragging giant stones under the whip of cruel pharaohs. Sounds dramatic and completely wrong. The pyramids weren't built by slaves. They were built by skilled workers, paid, fed, and even given medical care. Archaeologists have found workers' villages right beside the pyramids, complete with bakeries, breweries, and housing that screams construction crew, not slave camp. These people were proud Egyptians, working on a project that was part holy mission, part national pride. So no, the pyramids weren't monuments to oppression. They were history's most ambitious job site, with beer breaks included. Number 4. The Great Wall of China is visible from space. You've heard this once in school. The Great Wall of China, the only man-made structure visible from space. Sounds epic, right? Humanity's fingerprint on the planet. Except astronauts have been politely correcting that for decades. From orbit, the wall blends right into the landscape. It's about the same color as the surrounding rock and soil. You can barely see it even from a plane. The myth started in the 1930s, long before anyone had actually been to space, and it stuck because it made a great headline. Number 5. Egyptians were obsessed with death. You've seen the mummies, the tombs, the pyramids, everything screams death cult, right? Ancient Egyptians must have been completely fixated on dying. Wrong. They were obsessed with living forever. All those elaborate tombs, gold coffins, and scrolls of spells weren't about worshipping death. They were about making sure the good times never ended. The afterlife, to them, was just a continuation. Same job, same friends, same beer, but with fewer taxes and more sunshine. The death-obsessed stereotype came from Victorian archaeologists who misunderstood the culture through their own morbid lens. Egyptians didn't love death. They feared being forgotten. Their monuments weren't tombstones. They were memory machines. Number 6. Romans constantly wore togas. Movies make it look like every Roman spent their life elegantly wrapped in white fabric, sipping wine and quoting philosophy. Reality check. Nobody lived like that. The toga was basically the ancient version of a tuxedo, formal, uncomfortable, and impossible to put on without help. It was made from a giant sheet that could weigh up to 20 pounds. You didn't just throw it on. You engineered it. Regular Romans wore tunics, simple, comfy, and practical. Think of it as the ancient world's hoodie and sweatpants combo. So Rome wasn't a non-stop toga party. It was full of people who couldn't wait to get home, ditch the fancy fabric, and relax like the rest of us. Number 7. Cleopatra was Egyptian. The eyeliner, the headdress, the Nile, she must be Egyptian royalty, right? Not even close. Cleopatra was Greek. She came from the Ptolemaic dynasty, descendants of one of Alexander the Great's generals who took over Egypt after his death. Her family ruled for nearly 300 years, barely bothering to learn Egyptian until she did. Cleopatra was actually the first of her bloodline to speak the local language. So when we picture her as a homegrown Egyptian queen, we're basically watching ancient political cosplay. She ruled Egypt, yes, but by blood, she was Macedonian through and through. Cleopatra wasn't the last pharaoh of Egypt. She was the last Greek to pretend to be one. Number 8. Gladiators always fought to the death. Hollywood loves the image. Two sweaty warriors locked in a brutal death match while the crowd screams for blood. But in reality, constant death matches would have been terrible business. Gladiators were expensive investments. They were trained professionals owned by their managers, not disposable cannon fodder. Killing one every fight would be like burning your star athlete after every game. Most matches ended when one fighter was clearly beaten, not dead. And that famous thumbs down signal? Historians aren't even sure it meant death. It probably meant sheathe your sword. So no, the Colosseum wasn't a slaughterhouse. It was ancient Rome's version of the UFC. Violent, sure, but mostly for show and profit. Number 9. The Library of Alexandria was destroyed in one night. We all picture it. A massive library, scrolls stacked to the ceiling, and one tragic night where flames devoured centuries of ancient wisdom. The ultimate intellectual apocalypse. Except that never actually happened. The Library of Alexandria didn't die in a single fire. It was slowly gutted over hundreds of years. Wars, politics, neglect, bad luck. Julius Caesar burned part of it. Later invaders trashed more, and by the time anyone noticed, it was basically a ghost town full of ashes and empty shelves. The One Night Inferno story? A dramatic rewrite by later historians. The truth is much duller and sadder. Civilization's greatest library wasn't destroyed overnight. We just stopped taking care of it. Number 10. Medieval people thought the earth was flat. Ah yes, the classic image. A bunch of medieval peasants trembling at the edge of the world, terrified they might fall off. Cute story. Totally fake. Educated people in the Middle Ages knew the earth was round. They'd known since ancient Greece. Sailors saw ships disappear hull first over the horizon, and scholars even calculated the earth size with impressive accuracy. The flat earth myth was actually born much later, in the 1800s, when writers tried to paint the Middle Ages as a dumb, superstitious era before the enlightened modern age. So no, Columbus didn't prove the earth was round. He just proved people in the 1800s loved rewriting history to make themselves look smarter. Number 11. Knights could barely move in armor. You have seen it in movies. Knights waddling around like tin cans, struggling to lift a sword, helpless if they fell over. The truth? Medieval armor was way more advanced than Hollywood gives it credit for. A full suit of plate armor weighed around 40 to 60 pounds, about the same as a modern soldier's gear. It was balanced, jointed, and designed so knights could run, climb, even mount horses without help. There are actual videos of historians doing cartwheels in replica armor. The clumsy knight myth came from later centuries, when people found the armor in museums and assumed no one could move in it. In reality, knights weren't walking coffins. They were medieval tanks, fast, deadly, and shockingly mobile. Number 12. Medieval people never bathed. Everyone loves to picture the Middle Ages as one big, filthy, mud-covered stink fest. People terrified of water and allergic to soap. But medieval folks weren't nearly as dirty as the legend claims. Public bathhouses were common across Europe, especially before the Black Death. People bathed regularly, sometimes daily, and even used scented oils. Medieval medical texts literally recommend bathing for health and hygiene. Sure, plumbing wasn't great, and things got grimmer during certain plagues, but cleanliness wasn't unheard of, it was expected. The myth came later, spread by Victorians who wanted to feel superior to their uncivilized ancestors. In truth, medieval towns smelled bad, but so did Victorian ones. At least, the Middle Ages had better soap. Number 13. All women were helpless damsels. If you believe medieval movies, every woman was either locked in a tower or waiting for a knight to rescue her. Reality says otherwise. Plenty of medieval women ran estates, managed businesses, and even commanded armies. Noble women ruled in their husband's absence, and queens like Eleanor of Aquitaine or Matilda of Tuscany were political powerhouses. In towns, women were merchants, brewers, and artisans, sometimes even members of guilds. Sure, the system favored men, but helpless damsels? Not quite. That image was crafted by later writers, mostly men romanticizing chivalry. In truth, medieval women weren't sitting around brushing their hair and humming to birds. They were working, ruling, and surviving, same as everyone else. 14. Cavemen rode dinosaurs. The Flintstones lied to you. Cavemen and dinosaurs never shared the planet, not even close. Dinosaurs disappeared about 65 million years before humans showed up. The earliest human ancestors appeared only 2 to 3 million years ago. That's a 63 million year gap, not a scheduling error, but an entire epoch of missing time. Yet somehow, cartoons, cheap toys, and bad museums keep mashing the two together. The idea of humans riding triceratops is fun, but scientifically ridiculous. We're closer in time to the T-Rex than the T-Rex was to the Stegosaurus. So no caveman ever rode one. The real monster was our imagination, and maybe 20th century marketing. Number 15. The Wild West Duel. High noon. 2 gunslingers. Dust swirling. Fingers twitching. It's the single most iconic image of the Wild West, and it's completely Hollywood fiction. Real gunfights were nothing like cinematic showdowns. They were messy, panicked, and over in seconds. Often, both shooters missed entirely. And those legendary lawmen, most were just overworked small-town sheriffs dealing with drunkards, not high-stakes duels. The average gunfight happened in saloons or dark alleys, often after too much whiskey. The winner was usually the one who shot first, not the one who was fastest. The Old West wasn't a ballet of bullets. It was chaos, clumsiness, and luck, but that doesn't sell movie tickets, does it? Number 16. Viking funerals were flaming boat spectacles. You have seen it. A burning ship sailing into the mist as a warrior ascends to Valhalla. Epic. Also nonsense. The whole flaming boat funeral idea was a myth created centuries later. Vikings cremated their dead on land. Ships were precious, expensive, and vital for trade and war. Burning one for a funeral was like torching your Ferrari for a memorial. Sure, fire was part of their rituals, but the flaming sea send-off? That's poetic invention, not Norse reality. It was logistically impossible anyway. You'd miss the boat, set the shore on fire, or have your honorable funeral float back, half-burned, by morning. Beautiful idea. Terrible physics. Number 17. Newton's apple bonk. You've heard it. Isaac Newton sits under a tree, an apple hits his head, and boom, gravity is born. That neat little story is the ultimate oversimplification of genius. Newton himself said he saw an apple fall, not that it hit him. It simply made him wonder why objects always fall straight down. That question sparked years of grueling math, experiments, and breakthroughs, not a cartoon eureka moment. The apple story stuck because it makes complex science sound magical. But Newton didn't discover gravity because of fruit trauma. He did it because he was obsessed, relentless, and brilliant. The apple didn't give him the answer. It just got the gears turning. Number 18. Medieval people died at 30. People in the Middle Ages only lived to 30. That stat gets tossed around like a death sentence, and it's wildly misleading. The average life expectancy was about 30 to 35, but that number includes infant deaths, which were tragically common. If you survived childhood, you could easily live into your 60s or 70s. So no, medieval folks weren't all dropping dead before their midlife crisis. They just had a brutal start, plagues, infections, famine, but if you made it to adulthood, you stood a decent chance. It's not that life was short. It's that childhood was terrifyingly fragile. Number 19. Pirates made their victims walk the plank. Walk the plank. The classic pirate punishment, equal parts dramatic and terrifying. Too bad, it's basically fanfiction. There's almost no historical record of real pirates using planks at all. The idea came from 18th and 19th century adventure writers who thought it sounded thrilling. In reality, pirates were violent and practical. They didn't need a theatrical prop. If they wanted you gone, they'd just stab you, shoot you, or throw you overboard. Quick, efficient, and no wasted lumber. Walking the plank made for great stories and terrible realism. It was never pirate protocol. Just literary flair with a splash of salt water. Number 20. Gladiator thumbs down meant death. A defeated gladiator looks up at the emperor. The crowd roars. The emperor gives a thumbs down, death, right? Wrong. In Roman culture, thumbs down, pollice verso, likely meant spare him. The gesture for death was probably thumbs up or a stabbing motion. The confusion came from Renaissance paintings that flipped the symbolism. So every time you hit that dislike button, you're not condemning a video. You're actually sparing it. The Romans didn't do Hollywood drama. Their signals were practical, not poetic. Thumbs down didn't mean kill him. It meant put your sword away. Number 21. Ninjas wore all black. The shadowy assassin in jet black pajamas. That's the pop culture ninja. But in feudal Japan, dressing like that would get you caught instantly. Pure black stands out under moonlight. Real ninjas dressed as farmers, monks, or merchants, blending into crowds. For night work, they preferred navy blue or brown, which disappear better in low light. So where did the black suit come from? Kabuki theater. Stagehands wore black to be invisible to audiences, and artists later mistook that for authentic ninja attire. The truth is, real ninjas looked boring, which was exactly the point. They didn't hide in shadows. They hid in plain sight. Number 22. King Arthur was a real king. The noble ruler of Camelot, wielder of Excalibur, defender of honor. King Arthur is Britain's ultimate hero. There's just one tiny problem. He almost certainly never existed. There's zero archaeological or historical evidence of a King Arthur. The stories we know, Merlin, the Round Table, the Holy Grail, were written centuries after he supposedly lived. They're a mix of Celtic myths, poetic imagination, and national wishful thinking. If anything, Arthur might have been a mashup of several minor warlords or folk heroes. But a single, chivalrous king who united Britain? Pure legend. Arthur wasn't a man. He was a myth stitched together by storytellers and polished by centuries of British pride. Number 23. The croissant is French. The buttery, flaky symbol of France isn't French at all. The croissant actually comes from Austria. The original pastry was the kipferl, shaped like a crescent to celebrate a victory over the Ottoman Turks, mocking their crescent moon flag. In the 1830s, an Austrian baker opened a shop in Paris, and Parisians went wild for it. French chefs copied it, improved it with puff pastry, and voila! The croissant was born. It's the greatest culinary heist in history. The French may have perfected it, but they definitely didn't invent it. Your morning croissant? It's an Austrian immigrant with a French accent. Number 24. Medieval streets were open sewers. Gardez-vous. That's the mythic shout before someone dumped a bucket of filth out the window. While it did happen sometimes, it wasn't daily life. Most towns had public latrines or cesspits. Throwing waste outside your front door wasn't just disgusting. It was illegal and dangerous. Your angry sword-wielding neighbor wouldn't appreciate it. The idea that medieval Europe was one giant sewer mostly came from later historians exaggerating for effect, and from Victorian writers trying to make themselves look cleaner by comparison. So yes, it smelled sometimes. But constant poop rain from windows? That's just history's grossest exaggeration. Number 25, the White House was painted white after the fire. You have probably heard the patriotic version. After the British burned it in 1812, Americans painted it white to cover the scorch marks. Cool story. Totally false. The White House was always white. Builders used lime-based whitewash in 1798 to protect the sandstone from weather damage. It was called the White House long before the fire. The paint of defiance tale was invented later because it sounded heroic. The truth is far less glamorous. It was maintenance, not rebellion. Sometimes history's most dramatic stories are just boring home improvement projects. Number 26. The Titanic was called unsinkable. The unsinkable ship sinks. That phrase became the defining irony of the 20th century, but it's built on a lie. The White Star Line never claimed the Titanic was unsinkable. Not once. Before the disaster, one magazine called it practically unsinkable, which was meant as praise for its safety design, not a challenge to the gods. After the tragedy, newspapers latched onto the word unsinkable because it made for a perfect headline. Unsinkable ship sinks was too juicy to resist. The irony was invented after the fact. It wasn't arrogance that doomed Titanic. It was ice, bad luck, and human error. Number 27. Atlantis was a real lost city. The search for Atlantis has fueled countless books, movies, and late-night History Channel theories. But guess what? Atlantis was never real. The Greek philosopher Plato made it up, literally. He described Atlantis as a perfect society destroyed by its own greed to teach a moral lesson. It was a philosophical parable, not journalism. Over time, readers took it literally, and entire industries of explorers, mystics, and pseudoscientists tried to find it. But there's no evidence. None. Atlantis wasn't an ancient city swallowed by the sea. It was an ancient metaphor swallowed by people who didn't get the joke. Number 28. Napoleon's troops shot the Sphinx's nose. Poor Napoleon, he's blamed for everything, including ruining the great Sphinx's face. But French soldiers didn't blow off the Sphinx's nose. Sketches from travelers made centuries before Napoleon show it was already gone. The real culprit? A 14th century religious zealot who saw locals worshipping the Sphinx and took a hammer to its pagan idol face. So it wasn't artillery, it was vandalism. And not by bored soldiers, but by one extremely angry man with a chisel and zero chill. Napoleon's men did enough damage across Europe. Egypt's most famous nose job wasn't one of them. Number 29. Blackbeard was a bloodthirsty killer. Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, is remembered as the most terrifying pirate in history. Truth, he was more showman than psychopath. Blackbeard's most powerful weapon wasn't his sword, it was his image. He tied burning fuses into his beard, so his face smoked like a demon during battle. Crews often surrendered without a single shot. In reality, he wasn't especially murderous and preferred intimidation over combat. And buried treasure? None. He spent his loot on booze and parties, like every other pirate. Blackbeard's true treasure was his brand. He didn't need to fight. He just needed you to think he would. Number 30. The 300 Spartans fought alone. We all know the movie, 300 Spartans standing against 1,000,000 Persians. Cinematic perfection. Historical fiction. At Thermopylae, there weren't 300 Spartans alone. There were about 7,000 Greek allies from various city-states fighting beside them. And that 1,000,000-man Persian army, modern historians estimate closer to 100,000 to 300,000. Still incredible odds, but not literal fantasy. The legend grew because it made for a cleaner, more heroic story. Simple math, big emotion. The truth is still epic. A doomed stand for freedom. It just didn't need Hollywood inflation to be legendary. Number 31. Vikings wore horned helmets. Every Halloween costume shop says it. Viking equals horned helmet. But that's pure myth. No archaeological discovery has ever turned up a Viking helmet with horns. The few horned helmets that do exist are from centuries before the Viking Age and were used in ceremonies, not battle. So where did the image come from? From 19th century opera. Costume designers for Wagner's Ring Cycle thought horns looked dramatic, and the look stuck. Real Vikings wore simple, practical helmets made of iron or leather. Horns would have been a terrible idea. They'd catch weapons indoors. So the next time you picture a Viking warrior, ditch the horns. They didn't wear them. Only history's costume designers did. Number 32. Einstein failed math. Don't worry, even Einstein failed math, teachers say. Well, he didn't. Albert Einstein excelled in mathematics from a young age. By 15, he was already mastering calculus. The myth started when a reporter misunderstood his Swiss grading system, where lower numbers were actually better grades. Einstein himself laughed about it later, calling the rumor nonsense. He might have struggled with authority and bureaucracy, but numbers? Those were his playground. So no, Einstein didn't fail math. He failed to fit in. And that's probably what made him a genius. Number 33. Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." When told the peasants had no bread, France's queen supposedly sneered, "Let them eat cake." It's the perfect line, cold, heartless, and dramatic. But she never said it. The quote appears in a book by philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, written when Marie Antoinette was just 9 years old. He didn't even name her. The phrase was probably gossip that got attached to her later, when she became the symbol of royal excess. In reality, she was out of touch, yes, but not cartoonishly cruel. Let them eat cake was propaganda, not history. A lie so juicy, it survived centuries of fact-checking. Number 34. Humans only use 10% of their brains. It's a comforting myth. Imagine unlocking the other 90% and becoming a super genius. But neuroscience says no. Brain scans show that humans use virtually all parts of the brain, even while resting. Different regions activate for different tasks: movement, memory, imagination, emotion. Nothing just sits there collecting dust. The 10% myth likely started from early misinterpretations of neurological studies or motivational speeches about untapped potential. The truth? We are using our whole brain. We just haven't figured out how to use it wisely all the time. Number 35. Salem witches were burned at the stake. Nope, not one was burned. In the Salem witch trials of 1692, all executions were by hanging. Burning witches happened in parts of Europe, but in Salem, 19 people were hanged, and one man was pressed to death with stones for refusing to plead. Tragic, brutal, but no fire involved. The burned at the stake detail crept in later, blending American and European stories into one witchy horror myth. It's a small correction, but an important one. The Salem trials were horrific enough without adding flames that never burned. Number 36. Napoleon was short. We have all heard it. Napoleon, the angry little man trying to conquer Europe to make up for his height. But the truth? The guy was about 5 feet 6 inches or 5 feet 7 inches, perfectly average for his time. The confusion came from a mix-up between French and British measurements. A French inch was longer. British newspapers then exaggerated it to mock him. In reality, Napoleon was just a normal-sized dude with oversized ambitions. The Napoleon complex? That was British propaganda with a ruler problem. Number 37. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. Edison gets all the credit, but he didn't invent the light bulb. He perfected it. Dozens of inventors had already made versions of electric lamps before him. What Edison did was create a long-lasting filament and a marketable system for widespread use. In short, he didn't invent light. He just made it profitable, which in the modern world might actually be the brighter idea. Number 38. Benjamin Franklin discovered electricity with a kite. Every school book says it. Franklin tied a key to a kite and bam! Lightning equals electricity. But the real experiment didn't quite work like that. He never discovered electricity. It was already known. He was studying lightning's electrical nature. And no, he didn't stand in a thunderstorm holding a metal key. He would have been fried. He used a silk kite, stayed under shelter, and collected static through the wet string. So yes, Franklin was a genius, but not an electrocuted one. Number 39, chameleon change color to camouflage. Nature documentaries love showing chameleons blending perfectly into their surroundings like reptilian ninjas. Except that's not why they change color. Chameleons shift hues to communicate emotions, control body temperature, or attract mates, not to vanish into the background. If a chameleon turned brown on your couch, it's not hiding. It's stressed. Their color changes are mood rings, not invisibility cloaks. 40. The Great Fire of London killed thousands. With a name like that, you'd think it was an apocalypse. But surprisingly, only a handful of people died, officially 6. The 1666 fire destroyed most of the city's wooden core, but most residents escaped. The low death toll probably came down to slow-burning buildings and luck. It was a disaster for property, not people. So while London burned, its citizens mostly survived.